Hello and welcome to Game Design Hour. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on each episode of the podcast, I interview the people who create the video games you know and love. On today's episode, I'm interviewing two of the amazing people behind the video game Tentacular. Tentacular is a VR game where you play as a giant sea creature completing tasks around your town. Without any further ado, let's meet our guests and get into the interview.
I'm Luca. I'm one of the two developers of Tentacular. We share a lot of skills for this project. I mostly focus on graphics, but also I'm responsible for some code, and we share some design decision as well. The core team is two people, but we also had help from freelancer for music and audio. Also, we hire a writer to write all the dialogue, and some extra help in programming as well, especially with shaders.
Yeah, I'm Simon. I'm the other half of the core team of Fire Punch, the Tentacular. I was more involved in the game design and the scripting. But Luca said, we mainly designed the game together.
So for both of you, what was the first thing that really sparked your interest in creating video games?
We are both of us very old people, and we both start in the Commodore 64 era. And for me, it was just like a natural convergence of interest of coding and art, and also video games, of course.
Yeah, it's pretty similar, but I'm even older than Luca. So for me, it was the VIC-20, which I got on a Christmas day in the 80s. And what was really cool about that is that at that time, I just got the computer and a handbook. So there weren't any games. My parents didn't buy any games. They didn't even realize there were games, because they wanted it for education. So, you had to start with that computer by typing in some listings, some code, and trying out. So that's how it started. And in that time, also arcades were big, video game arcades. So like getting the computer and trying to make anything that resembles an arcade game was like the biggest fun that was possible back then.
How did you all first think of the idea for Tentacular?
We actually, the first time we had access to a VR device was the original Vive. Even before it was on the store, a friend of us had a dev kit, so let us play with it. And then we organized a game jam. So just to test this new device and see what was the possibility. And we come up with a tentacle game, even though it was like completely different from the game is like you can see now. Our first experience in VR was creating a tentacle game.
Yeah, we had during the game jam we had 48 hours, which basically we used like half of it we just used to try out all the VR experience that were already out there, and then after we kind of rushed to create something, and what we like slapped together was like a weird experience with a tentacle monster in a city that was throwing around people and cars and stuff like that.
What made you want to take that game jam game and turn it into the full game that Tentacular is?
After the game jam, we put the game on, I think, itch.io, just because it was kind of fun. People were smiling when they played it. And like some early VR streamer picked it up and he played it, and he seemed to have fun. So we thought, maybe there's something there. I mean, we had fun too, but, it's different if somebody else is playing it. So, we kept talking about the game. And then we got some feedback from a German game fund. People were saying, hey, we're looking for like new tech experiences. And back in 2016 or in 2015, even when we did the first prototype, it was kind of a big thing. And so they encouraged us to pitch the game to the fund, and we got accepted. And then we had, some money to keep working on it more full time. And what happened first was that Luca, he picked it up and he basically changed the whole system of controlling, because like the original prototype was using a weird like IK setup where basically the tip of the tentacles was also the point where you grab with the controllers. And he rewrote everything and changed it so that you have the tentacles are expanding from your controllers into the scene and had physics. And that changed a whole lot of how the game would control and how the game would feel.
At the beginning, basically, the tentacle were just aesthetics, because the behavior was very similar to having just regular hands where you grab stuff and move stuff around. And I come up with the idea to make physics-based tentacle just because why not?
Oh, and that just changed a lot, in terms of what could be done, and also the difficulty and the dexterity required. And then we kind of realized, okay, there's more there we can do, and there's something you can master and something that can be also really fun to do.
When starting work on the full game, what was your brainstorming process like for coming up with new ideas for the game?
There was a lot of giggling involved. But most of the time, like, we were creating like bare levels, like white box level, and see what was fun to do. Or sometimes like other people were playing our prototype, and then we realized, I don't know, throwing stuff was fun, building stuff was fun, and we come up with the slingshot idea. And but basically, yeah, by experimenting what could be useful, especially because back then there were not so many VR games to get inspiration from.
Yeah, we wanted to be a bit careful about like the kind of, the type of interaction. We wanted to be very diverse in terms of, what you could do. But we also wanted to get away from like the mini game collection thing, which was a big no-no when we looked at Steam reviews from people. But the game features some interactions which are more like action-based, some little diversions. But the main mechanic is building structures with like what we call like magnets, which are like bit stiff, or like not so stiff devices that let you glue things together and build structures. And we always knew that we wanted to build around this main mechanic, but we also wanted to have some more relaxing, or chilling side missions. So we designed around those puzzle elements of the building mechanic, but then also just experimented with everything, that we enjoy doing with the tentacles. So it was very much a lot of experimentation involved. And also, since we both come from like a very strong game jam background, that was our preferred way of working, of just tinkering and see what was fun, what sticks.
Pretty much every game has different ideas that were thought about at one point, but ended up getting cut. What were some of those interesting sort of ideas that you thought about for Tentacular, but ended up having to remove?
I think it's like, since we were mostly experimenting with new ideas, so there's a lot of silly ideas that never make to the final game. Like at some point, I thought it was funny that this Few, as a giant monster, would be tasked to make hot dog for humans. So the idea to manipulate very, very tiny hot dog with your giant tentacle. But it didn't work out for various reasons. Also technical limitation. But it would be super like clumsy to do that. Also, Simon at some point was experimenting some baseball stuff, using the tentacle as a baseball bat. Also didn't work out.
Yeah, we added something that's kind of related to the hot dog thing, right? Because in one scene you have to arrange like a little mansion, the house, and the objects there. So that's basically the leftover of the hot dog scene. But the hot dogs were just so small, we couldn't use them. Yeah, we experimented a bit more with some other game mechanics. There was even some kind of golf game involved and things like that. But yeah, of course, if you deviate too far from the core idea, it just doesn't work. So we scrapped those.
Yeah, and also being as such a small team, we had to scope the game properly, because it's very easy to get out of scope and then disperse your work or never finish the game.
Yeah, we definitely had to scrap some things. I mean, fairly late in the process, I was working on a set of levels that involved some like new mechanic, and it was really interesting to see that it just didn't fit. It didn't fit the game. And after 3 months of basically working on that and even finishing some levels, I just said, okay, it's not going to work. It doesn't feel like it. I could totally imagine it now, like as DLC, but back then it just didn't felt like Tentacular.
As you said before, managing scope is a really important part of creating video games. How did you work to manage the scope of Tentacular while you were working on it? And how did the scope change from your first sort of idea to what you have now?
Okay, the thing is, like, the scope was detected also by the budget, because of course we need to eat, and especially at the beginning we're very flexible to have to always have the plan B of cutting and release like a minimum viable game anyhow. But we got lucky with the fact that then we managed to attract some more funds, and also we did some freelance work for third parties. and then we could keep adding stuff to the game until we end up in the game in a position where we like it. And you agree, Sam?
Yeah, we had. I mean, at the beginning we had a fairly small budget on. We started working with that, but then that was one of the big problems of the game, that we always had this bigger idea. I mean, everybody probably has that makes a game. We had this bigger idea, but we had the budget, so we're kind of always working on, okay, this could be, what we wanted to do, and this is what we have to do. And so we always had this weird split of, okay, but we still want to push it. And we were able to increase the budget basically 2 times. So we're always working on, okay, let's make it a bit bigger, and then keep, trying to find money, resources, help, and things like that. So we're always growing the game in a way. I mean, I think we pushed the release date at least 3 times, because we started, very small. And we were lucky, to find partners that would be happy to help us. But it's hard. I mean, some people are probably just more straightforward in their planning, but we were super playful, and we just kept going when it felt that it needed to grow at this, at that point.
When deciding that you wanted to take the Game Jam game and turn it into this full experience, did you always want to attach a story to it, or was that something that was added later down in production?
The idea is that the first prototype, you were like an actual monster in a city, so you would destroy everything, and we realized that was fun for just 5 minutes, was not fulfilling. And developing the rest of the game, we need to have a way to anchor the player to the world, why you're doing this kind of task, why, and then this force us somehow to come up with a story, and then we invest a lot in make it more coherent and set every level in the same universe.
Mm. I guess it was a process of both of the things, because even the initial prototype had a really weird kind of, at least a setting, that kind of kept it together, even though it was just what we thought of what it was. And after we started to seriously think about the game, we kind of realized that going away from a combative relationship between the humans, because in the beginning it was a monster that was angry at humans, it was adding a lot more possibility space to the game. We could do much more, interact with the people, and we realized, okay, there's a lot of potential for story there. And I always thought about it like a TV. I mean, it sounds weird, but a TV series where there's it's kind of main story, but there's these little quests that are tied to certain people and to certain ideas and to certain mechanics. So it was fairly early that we realized, okay, we have something we could tell, and we would like to tell. And then also, like I said before, there was a big problem with mini game collections. People were really angry at those tech demos that just were thrown out with some levels you could play. And so since we had decided we wanted a story, we really dug in that and tried to make it fleshed out.
What was your process for playtesting the game, and what sort of important information did you learn through playtesting?
At some point, playtesting become a problem because of Corona. We couldn't have the game show around. Not many people had access to VR, so we were testing ourselves. And we are part of a collective of game developer here in Berlin. Basically, we share office space with other developers, and at the beginning of the project, we sometimes ask our colleague and friend to just play in the office. But for the core part of the development, where we were stuck at home, we will basically test ourselves.
Yeah, and that was a big issue when there were we were lucky that before COVID happened, we had a big test of the intro part, the first half an hour at, was it EGX in Berlin?
EGX, yeah.
EGX in Berlin. So we had real people feedback, 40, 50 people play it, and we knew, okay, this would work, and we could, if we would go down that road, we could manage to do it. So that was good. And later in the process, of course, there was external QA who tested the game and everything, and they also gave us some feedback about things that might be tricky. But yeah, we still get feedback from people that are totally lost in the game in situations where we never expect there to be any problem. It's part of part of game dev.
Magnets, as we touched on before, are one of the main game mechanics of the game. Were there any interesting magnets that you thought about and maybe prototyped but never found a good place or level to add them into the game?
I mean, the thing is, we already created like lots of different of these objects that could be used like in a more complex scenario. The big problem for me wasn't creating more objects, but using them in not meaningful, but in levels that you'd be able to measure. Because of the way the game works, it's really hard to create levels that are free in a way, or where the goal is fairly free, because it's hard to judge, is this construction good or bad, or is it doing what it's supposed to do. So the more complex the constructions get, the harder it gets to measure success or to define what the player has to do. So basically, we had most of those like base magnets working in the first half a year. That's the first stuff we did come up with those ideas. But then making them into levels that were also attached to the story, they kind of made sense in the world, and that we could also measure, judge. That was much harder. So we still have some more objects in the pipe, which some of these might even be in the next update, I think. But yeah, the biggest problem wasn't toning down that, but making them all used in the levels.
So like, especially because come up with interesting gameplay, it's tricky. And also we didn't want to have like basically the whole game being a tutorial where every level you introduce a new mechanic and then you have to learn that mechanic, and the next level you forgot about that mechanic. So we try a little to combine whatever we already had. And some of the stuff we probably introduce in later updates.
Which parts of Tentacular did you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
I would say the tentacle physics went through a lot of iterations. Physics in games is always kind of tricky, and we were using Unity, and the joints in Unity are also very capricious. Like, it's very hard to tame them in the way. And since the tentacle are like the way you interface with the world, we want them just right. And we iterate a lot over them. And the latest iteration, it's like the one we decide to stick with.
Yeah, the tentacles, we reworked those at least 3 times completely, especially like the first ones. They were just totally they just used too many rigid bodies and joints, and like each sucker had its own joint connecting to objects and stuff like that. So we had to change that, and then when we went on quest, we had to redo everything again. So that was a lot of work. But on the other, like on the gameplay side, just making the regular levels and like scripting them, in combination with the little humans. It was also a lot of work, since we didn't have, this is basically all like hand scripted. There's no, we didn't write any other engine inside Unity that would handle that. So all these interactions are basically just long scripts that, that manage that. Look, hey, what has been done? What is, what does the player? Oh yeah, and also, especially in these situations, is the fact that the player can do anything at any time is a huge issue and takes a lot of time to counter in a way, or at least, may not counter, but to
anticipate,
factor in all these situations. Because in most other games, if you don't want the player to do anything, if you have ghost hands, that you just can't. But in Tentacular, since everything is, physics simulated, you can pick up everything, you can do everything. And also sometimes it's really weird why you can't just place object A, to spot B. So all these things took a lot more time than we expected. Yeah, just to make sure that like all different solutions, all different ways of doing it, all the orders in which you could do it. Yeah, and then the range of the player, the size of the player, the strength of the player, that took a lot of time and effort.
Is there anything that you wish you knew before starting work on the game?
Actually, not. Since we changed our mind a lot of time during the development, so we had time to adjust to. In my case, like I developed some shaders that I was very proud of because they're very performant. But then when we switched to Quest, the technique I was using was not working on Android, so I had to start over. And then since I didn't have the time to do everything over from all the assets, I had to kind of wrestle like the same behavior with this new thing. But other than that, yeah, since we are just too fast, it was very easy for us to change our mind on course. So we don't have many regrets that I'm aware of.
Are there any small, fun details that you've added into the game that you don't see many players notice, but you really like?
Yes. If you grab a dog and you put it in the water and then you put it back on ground, he will shake himself dry. And very few people notice this little detail. Or what else? Like we have a lot of like, Easter egg and stuff like in the games that very few people notice. But yeah.
I was totally obsessed with like little like physics things. So like later in the game, you get to use some like rocket engines, like they're called boosters, and you play with them. And like those rocket engines, they also affect the environment that they're boosting out basically particles, or like there's a force, and you can basically clean areas just using those rockets and push everything away. And just those little physics things, many people, they just go through the game because it's already 6 to 10 hours depending on how you play, and they don't even see these little things. But for me personally, it was like super important. Also how objects felt in the water. In the beginning I was totally wasting time like fine-tuning the buoyancy of these different objects, of like, how would that float, how would that feel. Even steel, even like stuff that would sink immediately, those steel beams in the beginning, I would add like buoyancy to them so they would like glide into the water and not just fall down. But after a certain point you stop working on that and you realize, okay, you have to finish a game, you have to ship a game.
Tentacular is filled with a bunch of different interesting puzzles, and when making a puzzle, it's important to make the puzzle difficult enough that the player feels challenged, but not so difficult that the player just gives up on it. How did you work to achieve that balance with the puzzles in Tentacular?
So I think there's two aspects, and there's two aspects to the difficulty of these puzzles. One is just, coming up with a solution. The other is dexterity. One of the big problems we had was that we worked and we lived in like as a tentacle for more than 3 years, and we were just really good with those tentacles, and judging, how players would feel, especially in later levels, was really hard. That was a thing we struggled with, but we were hoped that people, would get used to using the tentacles and getting better at that. For the difficulty of the puzzles, after testing, we realized that, everybody has their own idea of how to solve some things. And then that's why we added the hint system with the little person, which is voiced by Luca, Mr. Rosetto in the Reset House, to help people that just had a hard time figuring out what to do. And that was also because we realized that not having voiceover and having those speech bubbles not in your view, sometimes was really tough on understanding the process. Another thing that made puzzles, even especially in the beginning, really hard was that, like for example, one of the early puzzles is where you have to place a ship high in the air. It's a fairly easy puzzle because if you just use like 3 steel beams and you build a rigid structure with those, it's really easy to do. But in the course of after the release, we saw people building super complex constructions, that we'd never anticipated, even though we had the hint system, which they didn't want to use because, of course, it's much more fun to do this yourself. So this weird thing, this weird mix of like dexterity, hard to judge, then expectations on our side on how much like mechanical, skill somebody would have, and then complexity in later levels made it tricky. But I think we kind of managed, I guess. I mean, of course, I've stopped playing games because boss battles were too hard, or some I just couldn't pass a certain point.
Yeah, but also like different people have different opinion. We had the reviewer like, call this game a puzzle is a stretch because it's so easy. I went through like no problem, and some people were just rage quitting after a couple of levels. So it's hard to judge.
I guess the game requires a certain kind of patience because it's not an action game. It's like it's a lot of conversation going on and the puzzles. But I feel that if you take your time, it can be a rewarding experience to solve these.
What was the biggest challenge that both of you faced while working on Tentacular?
Yeah, being a small team, like everything was very tight. Like budget-wise, Also, we were anxious to, will we finish? We'll get somewhere. We will get. Also, the VR market in general was not as big as we anticipated. So we struggle a little with this, but other than that, I would say, for my opinion, we just powered through all the technical difficulties. We just did our best, basically.
I mean, of course, money is always, a big issue, and I was stressed out in between where we're hoping for budgets. Yeah, I guess in general, game development's, I guess, always ups and downs. Sometimes you think, oh, this is genius, and then the next day you just hope, oh God, hopefully someone will like it. Especially if you work in a vacuum for a while. Also, the COVID when COVID hit and we started working from home in the beginning, for me it was also super tricky to not be in the same room with Luca, because we sit next to each other. We just look at each other's screens, and we knew, what the other person was working on. We could just interrupt and say, "Hey, stop! This doesn't make sense. What are you doing?" And then also, in Germany, we had those lockdowns in schools, so my kids would stay home, and we would have to homeschool them. So that changed a lot in our daily rhythm and how we would work. And my wife and I, we just, we basically said, "Hey, let's not stress out too much. We just take our time for the kids, and then we would split up the weekends to work." So we kind of crunched in that sense. There wouldn't have been another option. So I didn't do many evenings because I wanted to keep a daily structure. But yeah, we worked into the weekends to make up for the time that we lost during the school hours. So that was tricky at first, but yeah, we got used to and we managed.
Can fans of the game expect to see more content in the future? If so, what will it look like?
We are currently working on updates, and the update will include some new feature and new levels. We don't want to spoil anything, but
you don't want to. I want to spoil it.
Okay, spoil it. Go ahead.
No, many people said, "Oh, I'm a good monster. I want to be a bad monster." So what we did was we worked on some destruction. So we added some destruction and houses. The next update will be a bit focusing on the sandbox aspect of the game, adding the option to build your own islands, with rocks and everything, and still in the same mechanic of grabbing stuff and placing them. But we want to give the player more freedom to create those things, to put a little city together with people and traffic and everything. And ideally to be able in the future to allow the player to share their levels in some way or another, but that's a bit further off. And what was interesting about that, we already have this sandbox playground there, but now making more sophisticated tools takes much more time than I expected. Because now you're creating the game, features of the game, and an editor for the people in the game. And that's a lot more work than I had hoped. So that's why also the update is a bit delayed, but it's going to be out soon.
Is there anything that you wish you could have done differently with making the game before the initial launch?
I'm personally struggling most with, I would have preferred to have the option for people that are really not into the narrative and the story to be able to skip certain aspects of the game and just play the puzzles. I'm thinking about that a lot, but it would basically require to rewrite 90% of the game, because basically in Tentacular the conversations they're controlling the progression of the levels, and doing that would just mean rewriting and retesting everything. But that's something I would have really liked to have changed, just be able to speed up a little bit and accommodate different types of players. I could imagine that would have helped a bit.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned while working on Tentacular?
Maybe it would be next game we should have a better plan from the start. Because since the nature of our development style is very experimental, we went back and forth to a lot of stuff. We had to scrap a lot of feature and code. Also, the story itself was until the very end not defined. So we create the story around the level we already had. In some cases, we also changed the level to accommodate the story, and no regrets actually, because then we end up where we want to be. But I guess for our next game, if we start from scratch, we will probably have a better planning.
Yeah, although I'm personally, I really enjoy being able to change course, fairly quick. So that was something I really would like to keep. even though, it's painful sometimes. But just, just the fact that you can change some things, just saying, hey, Luca, how about that? Let's do this, let's do that. That's really amazing. And of course, the smaller the team is, the less people involved and the less people have to change their art or whatever. So that's something let's say I would like to keep. But other than that, like Lucas said, a bit more planning. Also, maybe not moving the deadline 3 times, and also more stability right from the start in terms of the budget. Because this game was growing. This game was much smaller. This was like a 1.5 hour experience in the beginning, which then became bigger and bigger. Yeah, and also writing systems that are easily to expand instead of solutions that only work for certain situations. But I think in general, we already did some of that, and I'm really happy with the game. Especially like reading some of the reviews and some of the feedback. The first time I watched a streamer finish the game and watching the credits was really amazing. That was really a super nice experience.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to go and create their first game?
Go small. Like if it's your first game, you should go for a very minimal. You will learn a lot if you do like 10 small games, even if you never release them, instead of going for your dream RPG multiplayer thing. Like iteration beats like quality at the very beginning. So join Game Jam, try to challenge yourself in making smaller projects and finish them. Because I always say that making games is easy, but finish them is very hard.
I would even say make those 10 games and release them, because only then it's
of course,
you experience this moment of, okay, is it now, like, is it ready? Am I releasing it now? Like, yeah. So I would even say make them and release them.
What's next for both of you? Do you have plans for future games after Tentacular?
We don't have like a specific project we are working on, but we are like in the very early stage of planning something else. But still, Tentacular keep us pretty busy with the updates and bug fixing and stuff like that. But yes, we plan in the future to come up with something else.
Yeah, we're still pretty much in the process of working on the update full time. And to be honest, I'm still a bit hurt from, even though it's been a year, I'm, releasing the game. And I also don't want to leave, the world of La Calma and Tentacular. I really like working there and being there. And I feel there's a bit more, there's a bit more to it and more little stories to tell around that. So I'm quite happy that we can keep working on that while thinking about new stuff.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And that was the interview. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow and subscribe so that you can continue to see content like this. Also, consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you have a friend who you think might like it, make sure to share the podcast with them. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.